Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the People Overview Committee. Before we start, I need to inform you that this meeting is being streamed live and recorded. We have apologies for absence from Councillor Nat Green, who's been substituted by Councillor David Vasmer. Councillor Ruth Horton has been substituted by Councillor Roger Evans, and Sian Lyons, the Diocesan Board of Education. Do we have any pecuniary interest? Nope. The minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of November, as you all, seems a long while ago now. Very long while.
I'll move them.
Thank you. All in favour? Okay. We have no public questions and we have no member questions. So I'm going to ask Sonia Miller. Forgot your full title. To start the criminal exploitation report. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Sonia Miller. I'm the Assistant Director for Children's Social Care and Safeguarding for Shropshire Council. Also in the room are some colleagues from across the partnership. So before I start presenting the report, maybe if I could present and introduce who's also in the room to support the presentation of the report. So I've got Jeanette Hill. Just there's the button. This one.
Hi there, Jeanette Hill. I'm Service Manager within Children's Social Care. So I manage Compass, which is the front door, the assessment teams, the Trees team, which is our exploitation hub, and the Compass Help and Support team.
I've got a colleague from the Integrated Care Board.
I'm Vanessa Watley. I'm Director of Quality and Safety and Deputy Chief Nurse for the Integrated Care Board.
There's a colleague from the Youth Offending Service.
Hi, I'm Lucia Manning. I'm the Team Manager for Shropshire Youth Justice Service.
And a colleague from the police who has a lead for exploitation.
Good morning, I'm Chief Inspector Tracy Ryan, newly in post in the Safe Neighbourhood teams in Shropshire.
Okay. So thank you very much everybody for having child criminal exploitation back to the People's Overview Committee. On the 16th of November, we did a lengthy presentation from right across the partnership that looked at the detail of how exploitation is addressed in the county of Shropshire. We shared a lot of information around each partner's activity and what was working well and what some of the gaps were. Overview Committee requested that we came back this month to do a summary report, but also to look in a bit more depth at some of the key questions in relation to this. So I'm going to work on the basis that the report's been read. It does summarise what we sort of shared in terms of the partnership activity. My battery is about to die. And particularly the work of the safeguarding partnership as well. What it goes on to focus on in this report is two areas. One is the contribution of agencies towards the multi-agency working of Trees, which is the multidisciplinary team that responds to child criminal exploitation and looks at some of the wider resources that are available to that team, but also how it's made up and what the contributions are. And it also goes on to look at the response to the Telford Child Sexual Abuse Inquiry and the recommendations and what partners have submitted in terms of their response to that inquiry. And those were the main areas that we were asked to explore. I think the best option is that I take questions really more than anything rather than go through the report in detail.
Councillor Wild.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sonia, for your report. And I'm glad that the partners in the child exploitation are here today. That's very heartening. My view is, and hopefully it's shared by you, is that criminal exploitation of children isn't going to go away. So whilst, we have this data which says, it's reduced, the fact of the matter is there is no cure. And so it's an ongoing thing. And of course, the people that do all these horrendous things keep getting smarter. So each time we think we're doing something and getting somewhere, they find another way to go round the wreaking to get to these poor children. And one of the things I want to talk about and perhaps get a comment from the various partners is that I think if you put yourself in a vulnerable child's position, okay, because I thought about this a lot, and you've got a concern and you put your hand up and, you know, you say, right, something's not right here. You know, is there a clear pathway for somewhere for them to go? Because too often, you know, these whatever's happening are quite embedded where they are, and you get a vulnerable child and they say something and they just get disregarded. You know, I mean, admittedly, sometimes they may say something that's not quite right, but there has to be a way of monitoring these red flags, because it's so difficult to actually identify. And whoever these people are embedded, like I say, across everywhere. So that's a really important bit. So I'd like to know from each of you, because obviously there might be a flag raised at the hospital or the police, but I'd like to know how you deal with that, and also some reassurance that whilst, you know, the numbers you think have reduced, that actually you're still being as vigilant, if not more vigilant. Thank you.
If it's okay, can I start the response to that?
Certainly.
So the pathway is really clear, Claire, and it's been agreed by the Safeguarding Partnership. All information, intelligence, concerns, everything comes in through trees, and it's all monitored through the multidisciplinary team that works with trees, and it goes through criminal exploitation triage, and Jeanette can give you a bit more detail about how that works. The whole aspect of what we're working on is raising awareness, so that it's not just our partner agencies, it's members of the communities that can be reporting concerns, sharing intelligence information. It's anybody that knows and understands that criminal exploitation is happening. Whilst yes, we know that the number of county lines has reduced, the number of children that are at risk of exploitation is actually increasing, and that's because awareness is being raised and people are raising those concerns. All children are screened, and then they are triaged, and they're then risk assessed as to whether they're low, medium or high risk of being exploited, and then the response is proportionately kind of proportionate to that risk, and whether that's an early help response through working with schools, or whether that's a much higher risk sort of multi-agency response. But that pathway is really clear. It was reviewed in 2020, and it is agreed by the partnership. So all of the partners in the room are signed up to that pathway and know and understand how to promote that awareness. I don't know if you want to add any detail, Jeanette.
Before you do, can I ask you just to explain what trees stand for anybody listening?
Together, reducing and ending exploitation in Shropshire.
Thank you.
Just to add on to what Sonia's just described, so very clear pathway where there's a concern of exploitation raised, but what you've asked the question is about people's gut feeling, where they just don't know what it is. So we do have pathways to address that too. So we offer monthly consultation panels to any practitioner that's working with young people in Shropshire. They can book a slot and just anonymously, they don't have to name the child, they can just talk through a scenario and get some advice and some view on what it is that they're observing. But we also have a pathway where anybody, public, parents, professionals, can report concerns anonymously if they don't feel able to put their name to that, through Crime Stoppers, or directly through to the Safe and Neighbourhood teams, or through 101 if there's an immediate concern. So that could be anything from a school reporting that there's a car regularly parked at the bottom of the drive, or, you know, they're seeing something out in the community, maybe gangs congregating in the local park. It could be anything, and there is a way that those concerns can be shared. That will all then get fed through to the triage that Sonia's just described, where that's multi-agency attended. So we've got children's social care, youth offending service, targeted early help, health, education and police, all sit on the triage that's held twice weekly. And we discuss all the risk assessments that's come through, and then we'll discuss any intelligence that any agency has become aware of, so we can triangulate that information and decide really whether this is something that we do need to further assess, further investigate. So I do feel, and I'm pretty biased, but I do feel that we do have some robust processes really in place around
I
that.
think, can I just carry on from that? I do think it's important that especially vulnerable children have more than one place to go, because you know, with the best will in the world, they might try one thing and that might not work out for whatever reason. So they do have to have options, because the reality is probably a kiddie will only raise these concerns a couple of times and then they'll think, you know what, nobody's listening. So I think it's, you know, it's about getting the message out there and making sure that these, you know, vulnerable kids have somewhere where they can, you know, that they can go to.
Absolutely. I think it's everybody's responsibility to provide safe spaces for children. And that's the community, isn't it? It's from the local cafe to the professional establishments such as schools, and it's our job as professionals to raise as much awareness as we possibly can, really.
Hilary.
Hello, Hilary Love, Councillor. I was just reading the report, and it's really encouraging seeing what you're doing, and you're doing some great work. And I may have missed it, but I'm just thinking about education and getting into the schools and sort of highlighting the risks to the children so that they, you know, I'm just wondering, do you do that? And also for parents, you know, a lot of parents may not aware of how vulnerable their children might be. And do you do sort of regular parents' evenings, or talk to parents, or send things out to parents just to sort of look at prevention? Because every child could be vulnerable to this. And I'm just wondering, is that something that's in place in Shropshire?
So it's the school's responsibility to do that within the school curriculum and to communicate with parents as well. So it's not just a local authority response. We do raise awareness. We've held a number of community-based awareness-raising events where members of the community, parents, children, young people, schools, etc., are invited to hear about exploitation, the risks, the vulnerabilities, what's happening in their local area. And they've been very successful. Many of the schools have had some of the drama companies in that do the kind of plays for young people around understanding what sort of the grooming behaviours are and the coercion behaviours are. I think there's always more you can do around that, Hilary. And I think that in Shropshire, we do suffer a little bit from, we're a rural county, things like that don't happen here, when actually they do, and more so because it's a rural county. So there's always more that we can do. We have a parent leaflet with information. We have a Trees newsletter that goes out to all professionals. We ask schools to share with parents. It's a loud parental voice in that newsletter that goes out quarterly. There's as much as we're able to do. There's always more to do. And I think that members have a role in that as well, in terms of you being able to talk in your communities around the fact that criminal child exploitation is a risk in every community, no matter how small the village is, no matter how small the hamlet is. We have children and young people who are vulnerable and being targeted.
Yeah, yes, because I'm sure there's an awful lot of parents that don't think it would happen to their child, and of course it could.
I say I've attended one of those at the school at Shrewsbury where parents were invited to, and I was amazed how many parents turned up. And it was excellent. There was lots of information for them. I've also attended a drama one and a film that was given to children at the school in Whitchurch. And I do know from the one, in the interval afterwards, 4 of those girls came to that teacher because what they'd seen, they realised was happening to them on their phones.
Yeah, so
they do get the message, yeah. Hopefully. Councillor Pardy, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Kev Pardy, Sunderland Councillor. First of all, if we've read the papers of late, the newspapers, we can see there's been some successes in arrests, etc., of people that are sort of exploiting these children. So I'd like to thank the police and other agencies involved for that. I think that's great. I've got 2 questions. The first question is, do you know the percentage of these children that are not in education, that are not in education, in other words, under 16, but not going to school, and so they're exploited. And secondly, I've forgotten, so I'll come back to that. Thank you.
Councillor Pardee, I think the number of children varies each time you get a kind of referral in, because some of them aren't and some of them aren't. It's a high percentage. And it's the main risk factor for children escalating in terms of risk is them not being in education, particularly if under 16. So there's a whole piece of work that education are leading on. David Shaw leads on, working with schools on reducing permanent exclusions, fixed term exclusions, in partnership with the Trees team. And really focusing on how do we understand what's going on for these children and young people before they become exploited. Both myself and Head of Early Help attended with David the secondary heads meeting last week to kind of further that conversation. There's a whole piece of work that's across the partnership on, we call it Missing Mondays, but where we look at children who are missing education, either because they're not in school or because they're missing from school, those that have missing episodes, those that are not maybe attending appointments or, working in partnership with the youth offending team properly, etc. So we track those children because those are the ones that are most likely to be at risk of exploitation or being exploited. Police, very much share their intelligence around children and antisocial behaviour and where that's kind of coming up as well. So there are complex systems in place that really know that, but we do know and understand that not being in school is the greatest risk factor, and I think it's also the greatest success. I think Jeanette can talk a bit more detail about reducing the risk of exploitation when you can get a child back into education. Do you want to pick that up?
Just to add to that, we've more recently started a process whereby any young person that we've identified as being at risk of exploitation through our triage process, we actually write to the head teacher of that school to say that this young person has been identified as at risk. We know that it can be difficult to manage these children within school because they often come with complex needs, but we would ask before, even before it gets to a point where you're thinking exclusion might be on the horizon, that you speak to us and that we can put in place a multi-agency wraparound support, to help maintain that young person's education, because it massively increases a young person's risk when they're no longer in school for all the obvious reasons. They don't have that professional eyes on them. Often parents are having to work, so they often have time alone. We know that perpetrators out there will purposely, target vulnerable young people who are just seen out and about on the streets. So, it's to everybody's benefit, really, that we keep these kids in school.
Thank you. And the second question was that you may have gone over slightly. I think it comes back to something that Claire said. If a parent is suspicious of a child but has no verbal proof or anything that the child might be involved in county lines, most people would think automatically that they should go to the police for advice, but some parents may not want to do that. Would they come to an agency like Trees, or what would they do?
Yes, we accept calls of concern from anybody, including parents, and often parents don't have that vocabulary, do they? They don't know it's exploitation. They just know they've seen a change in their child's behaviour. They may be going missing, they may be bunking school, they may be stealing, they may be coming home with unaccounted for money or extra phones, or change their friendship group. That's all they can describe as these changes that they're seeing in their child, but it's us professionals who will have the understanding and the connections that there's a possibility that could be exploitation. So where a child's not known to us, we would identify a professional that's familiar with the child, who knows the child best and who the child would be comfortable with, to do a risk assessment, to explore some of those concerns a bit further. That would come back through the pathway to our triage, and then, if necessary, it would then go through for a social work assessment, depending on the severity of the concern.
Thank you.
Councillor Basma.
Thank you, Chair. As a kind of sub-member of this committee, excuse me if I make some comments which are not particularly relevant. First thing I want to say is that this report is brilliant and very, very useful and lots of detail. But I have trouble with acronyms. And not being a regular member of the committee, it would have been really useful actually to have a list of acronyms at the back. You know, it's just for somebody who doesn't normally deal with this matter. So
apologies, I thought we had put all of them in there. If I've missed some,
I know, but the thing is, as you're reading through it, you forget. I'm terrible. Okay. I forget. So it'd be very useful. But the report's very, very interesting. And I just wanted to say, and also I thought it was very interesting about the savings you're managing to achieve, which you outlined at the back of the report, which is fascinating. You know, the actual fact, it seems to me that you're making significant savings and at the same time getting a better outcome for the children and the families involved. So I thought that was really, and obviously hopeful that, you know, given the authority's financial position, those sort of measures, initiatives can continue. The one thing I was interested in was whether, given there's some very useful recommendations, but I don't know how the committee actually measures the performance in a sense, whether there's any figures can be generated, or more an easier way of actually measuring how you get on. There's a number of commitments here which are really useful, but I'm not quite sure how you can measure those in the long term. Perhaps you'd come back to me. And just the last point I wanted to say is there's a lot of information here about the policy and the means by which you actually kind of prevent exclusions and try to get children taken forward and dealt with in a sense. But children who have been excluded, I'm aware of this in Shrewsbury, and I'm also a member of the town council, and we have a scheme of kind of alternative curriculum scheme where we try and kind of take in children who've been excluded. And I know that I think the Shropshire Youth Association have done some work on this as well. And I wanted to what extent you've got support where children have been excluded. To what extent is there liaison with organisations, or you have making provision to actually try and identify what's happening and give them support long term, because the children who have been excluded are the ones that really are in danger, the ones that usually are exploited. And I just need a bit more information about that.
Absolutely. So in terms of the measures, we shared a lot of data at the lengthy presentation back in November, so that wasn't repeated in this. So we collect a huge amount of data from trees, but each partner agency also collects data in terms of children that are known to them in terms of exploitation, and therefore it's a complex data set. There are significant numbers of amounts of data that are collected, and we did share that in the lengthy presentation back in November. I can make sure that report's forwarded to you if that would be helpful, because it was done as a slide pack. There's a lot more detail in that report. In terms of preventing exclusions and the children that have actually been excluded, absolutely. I'll let Jeanette talk to you in a bit more detail, but there are a number of partner agencies that are actually set up to work with children who are being exploited, at risk of exploitation, because there is quite a specialist nature to it. And obviously they bring with them their own sets of challenges and risks in terms of some of the behaviours that they've learnt whilst being exploited, and risks to other children and young people. So there are a number of voluntary agencies that work alongside trees. They are listed in the report, but I'll ask Jeanette to give you a bit more detail about what they do and how they work.
So there's two main commission services that support children who have been exploited. So one of those is Climb. I don't know if you've heard about Climb. That's an organisation that's run through the Children's Society. So they work with young people that are at risk of criminal exploitation, and they get involved very early on. So where there's those emerging concerns, as you've just described yourself, it's easier to get involved right at the beginning than when a child's entrenched in gangs and it's more difficult for them to leave. So that's one service. Another service is the Branch Project. So they will work with young people who are at risk of sexual exploitation, and they work with young people all through the spectrum, not necessarily early help, but also those who are at high risk and maybe on child protection plans. So their criteria is slightly different. We also work with bespoke services across the county. So you might have heard of Bright Stars Boxing. So we can commission them on a needs-led basis. They do a lot of mentoring. They offer a fantastic diversion for some young people, giving them an interesting hobby. And what we have to kind of understand is it's quite typical for teenagers to want to be risky. It's part of growing up. So if you can give them a safe, risky activity such as boxing, it can, often offer, an alternative way, and a different peer group, and like I say, the mentoring that goes alongside that. There's also projects such as the True Project, which is a local commission service run by an ex-gang member. So it's something about that lived experience and what they can offer young people. So there's quite a range of services, as well as obviously our statutory services. We have dedicated family support workers who are part of our TREES team, and also a young person's drug and alcohol advisor. So where young people, there's often a connection between a young person using substances and then being drawn into exploitation, but often they don't want to access mainstream statutory drug and alcohol services. Or a young person's advisor is very engaging, and he works, with tenacity, and he's having some real successes engaging some of our most complex young people. As I've said, we've got 3 family support workers dedicated to the TREES team, so they will do all the return home interviews. So where a young person's been missing from home or care, often there's a correlation between that and also being exploited. So it's what we're able to do is offer that same person. So often if a young person is repeatedly going missing, rather than just sending somebody out on duty on an ad hoc basis, it's about having that trusted adult. So it's the same person that we're able to follow up. So hopefully they'll build a trusting relationship. And then obviously not to forget our targeted early help service. They have a lead within their service for exploitation. So where a young person has already got an established relationship with a worker within early help, but we know that their risks are escalating, we won't necessarily bring them through to children's social care and disrupt that relationship, because we know that doesn't work often for young people. But we will do a support, that lead professional, to deliver the work that's needed with that young person. So there's quite a range of services. We know where a child has been excluded from school, it can be quite tricky finding them an alternative. So often they will go to TMBSS, which is our pupil referral unit, and they are given a high priority where there's a known risk of exploitation. So they're risk assessed, and we aim to get them back into some form of education as quickly as we possibly can. Sorry, I don't know if that's answered the question.
So can I just come back? So presumably what happens, you track when a child is excluded from school, you track them. Is that right? Because you always worry that children somehow lost to the system when they get excluded from school, and presumably you track them, and you then think of options in order to give them support. Is that how it works?
So our education colleagues, they track all children that are excluded or at risk of exclusion, and have fixed term exclusions as well. So they track all children. Obviously, where TREES kicks in is where there's an identified risk of exploitation, whether that's low, medium or high. And then we don't just track, proactively work to get them back into education, and whether that's a sort of alternative provision initially, and with them then to move back into mainstream school when it's the right thing to do, or whether or not they stay in alternative provision. Yes, we track, but I think more importantly, we proactively work to make sure that they are diverted away from being available to be exploited. It might be worth just asking Lucia as well, because I know the youth offending team work with particular children in a particular way, and they have access to some resources.
Thank you. Yeah, so within the Youth Justice Service, we work with a number of children and young people on diversionary pathways and routes. And the concept is not to criminalise a child, but to best understand that child's identified needs. and look at tailoring a bespoke package of support for that child. So as it stands at the moment, we primarily deliver what's called an outcome 22 for children and young people, which gives them an opportunity to engage in intervention and support. And an offence then becomes a no further action when they've engaged with one of our youth justice service case managers. Within the yacht, we also have a substance misuse specialist, and we have an education, training and employment officer, and that person will attach themselves to every case. So where there are concerns, or where actually a child might be thriving or something's going positively well, or there are concerns about school environment or exploitation, that person will work collaboratively with schools. We have been part of obviously some of the locality meetings and some of the disruption work that's happened in the community from a youth justice service perspective, because as you can appreciate, a number of the children within that cohort are open to the youth justice service. Obviously our case managers are trained in terms of adult childhood experiences and trauma-informed practice. So we attach a case manager to that to work quite thoroughly with that child and young person, but also work in a holistic and therapeutic manner with family members and any siblings within that home to really support them in terms of identified needs. Part of that is working incredibly closely with our multi-agency partners and ensuring that even if they're with the Youth Justice Service for a shorter period of time, there is still a really fluid response moving forward, and there's a clear exit plan and strategy from the Youth Justice Service, so we are clear what agencies and support networks are then in place for that child.
Can I just say, when I first started on this panel 14 years ago, we used to have a yearly report from the Safety Partnership, and over the years, I've seen the support we give children grow and grow and grow to now we're really getting these children sorted out and giving them the help they need. Councillor Evans, you were next.
Thank you, Chairman. As a substitute, apologies if I've covered ground which has already been covered, but reading the report, there is a section in the report which says exploitation gaps in service. Can that be expanded in dates and timescales there later on, or part of the report later on concerns about the therapeutic support and the money that's on there? Is there sufficient budget in there for doing it? And the third bullet point under that one says, are working towards a solution. Can that be expanded a little bit? And then I see the recommendations there, and can that be again be expanded? And as far as trees go, I did a bit of reading before I came here, and when I looked on trees, the latest newsletter that I could see was winter 22. I'm not sure if that's correct. Was that last winter or this winter for the newsletter?
It's the December one for 2022.
Okay, well, just so that we're sure. Yeah, it's the gaps that are highlighted in the report and also the recommendations. Is there anything there that I would suggest that we need to take up with other people, and looking at the budget situation for Shropshire Council, want to ensure that there is sufficient budget for next year to actually do what is at present a good service, and it's getting a better service? Thank you, Chairman.
I haven't got the report in front of me, sorry, because my laptop's just gone completely flat. In relation to the sort of structure of trees, it is currently funded directly by Children's Social Care through the Council, the People's Directorate and Public Health. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Evans. With the police having quite heavily dedicated resources as well. So I'm sure that Tracy would be able to expand a little bit, but it is detailed in there that there is a dedicated detective sergeant, 5 detective constables and the coordinator post, and they also have like a sort of youth support provision as well. So there is financial resources directed to exploitation through trees or working in close partnership with trees. The youth offending team have dedicated resources and have a statutory duty to work alongside that as well. For us in Shropshire, the gap that we've got, which we were trying to sort of like articulate really, is there's no yet a clear either pathway to a timely response for psychological and emotional support for children and young people, or preferably that support being available as part of that multidisciplinary team. There's a lot of complicated reasons for that, from both MPFT, the provider of psychological support services, but also the ICB. And I think we are trying to work towards what would be a solution. But for children and their lived experience, there is a real gap, because when we're talking about working with children who are being exploited, you talk about moments of opportunity and that things happen to them. And in that moment, they are then open to meeting somebody new, thinking about psychological support, understanding that they're being harmed and wanting to do something about it. And if you miss those moments, it becomes harder and harder and harder to get them to be open. And the system that we have at the moment is that of a referral, waiting list, assessment pathway. So we do need to look much more creatively with our health partners at how we can achieve that. It's not an easy answer, because obviously it is quite dedicated and it's quite specialist support. And the psychological support that children and young people need is quite specialist. What you're talking about is their trust in human beings being systematically deconstructed by exploiters and rebuilt with people who exploit them. So to psychologically address that, it's quite a specialist kind of way of working with young people. It's not just send them along to a counsellor and you know they'll help them. It is a gap, and it is an area of concern for everybody in the room. And I know that my health colleagues are concerned as well, particularly as children become 16, 17, 18 and move into adulthood. We know that exploitation, being exploited, leads to quite serious mental health issues in their early 20s. So it is a priority sort of gap that needs addressing. Perhaps, Chair, if it's okay with you, my colleague Vanessa could just kind of respond from the ICB's perspective.
Thank you, Sonia. So I'm relatively new to this subject, but have been briefed, and I will be taking over in March the child exploitation subgroup of the Telford report recommendations. So there was 5 very specific actions for health there, and this was one of them. So early conversations have been going on with partners to see, as Sonia really rightly says, what is the best support, and is it what we've always done, or is this actually something that looks really new for children that are not only sexually exploited but criminally as well. So those conversations are going on at the moment, as well as the support of the conversations around how do we fund this as a priority. And certainly from the independent inquiries report, we've got a requirement to deliver something in relation to what Sonia's described. So something will be happening. In the meantime, we're looking at our existing resources, ensuring that we've got really good training across all of our providers, and working with the local authority on that as well. GPs have been specifically audited from a primary care perspective, and that's in Telford, but there's no reason why that won't expand beyond and can't be, if it works, we can replicate those kind of arrangements. And the other thing that's going on with our primary care colleagues is looking at how we flag children that have raised concerns, so that if they move from one GP surgery to another or see different practitioners within that surgery, that we can highlight people and get them into appropriate services as soon as we can. So there's lots of work going on, and there's really focused action around those 5 health priorities, which will, I know there's a Telford element to that, but that will benefit the whole of Telford and Wrekin. We won't be putting in an action in Telford that would benefit Shropshire without really weighing up what we're doing. So that's really where we are at the moment. Obviously, we work really closely with our mental health partners. We're looking to address existing waiting lists and making sure that we've got every opportunity to deliver a service based on what we currently have, but not excluding that actually there's something that needs to look different in the future.
You okay with that?
Yeah. Well,
just go through sorry, because the second part of your question was for me to go through the recommendations. Okay, so just revisiting the recommendations then. We've put them as recommendations because they're pieces of work that need to be kind of addressed across the partnership. The implementation of a pathway for addressing trauma experience as a result of exploitation, that's what we've just talked about.
And it is a health response, but it's also a partnership response. We do need to make sure that that partnership link is there, and that support is accessible to children and young people, but also is available post 18, because a lot of them are able to exit exploitation with support, but they're not actually able to address the trauma and the impact of that until they're adults. So that is about really making that specialist provision available, not just to children and young people. What we currently have is a system whereby, as young people become 18, they get referred to relevant services for them. So they will get referred to adult mental health, or sort of adult drug and alcohol services, etc. What we don't have is a pathway of those services being joined up. So they go from a response that's very coordinated, very supported, very understood, has a police aspect to it, has a social care aspect to it, has a kind of joined up response, to then suddenly at 18 needing to be referred to 4, 5, 6 different practitioners again. And again, we find that they drop out of those services because it's not that holistic response. So we're calling that a transition safeguarding pathway. And that's been discussed at the Safeguarding Partnerships priority setting meeting last Friday, about how do we make that a priority across the partnership, that these young people at 18 don't just fall off a cliff because they've had a coordinated response as children and young people. The third one is that there is the Safeguarding Partnership is due to publish a report, several, two, I think, actually, in relation to young people and their experience of exploitation. And within that, the voice of the child is heard very strongly. And what we would be asking members to do is to say that needs to be listened to and understood, and that we need to be making sure that we are listening to the voice and experience of children and young people. I actually did the interview with the young person, and she brought me right up to date with actually how exploitation works and how quickly it moves, and how quickly it changes and develops, and how quickly we as services have got to be much swifter at responding to it. And then we're working on a 5-year partnership strategy, which is going to pull all of that together, Councillor Evans, so that we are really clear in Shropshire about how we're going to be addressing exploitation. And exploitation doesn't stop when children become 18. They become adults, they become criminally responsible, but they're still being exploited. And then what they're doing is then quite often is grooming other young people into being exploited as well. So us having services that stop at 18 isn't going to address the problem of exploitation in Shropshire. And we'd really like to work with some more schools in areas where there's starting to become a risk of exploitation. So rather than responding where we've known that there's been quite a significant risk, i.e. Shirehall, Shrewsbury, and more recently Ellesmere, actually we work with schools much more closely to do those awareness events before it becomes a problem. When we start to see things starting to happen, you can tell that there are changes and there's patterns that start to kind of give that intelligence information.
One small follow-up, if I can, Chairman, and that is refugees. Ukrainian, we've all heard about, but there may be others coming in. But at that transition stage, are there anything that this council should be doing more, or in partners?
I think that's a really difficult one to for me to answer in the context of exploitation. I mean, if they're being exploited, then obviously they'd receive the same support and services as any other child or young person. And if there's any evidence of them being at risk of modern slavery or being trafficked or anything like that, then obviously they would get the same sort of kind of support and partnership work that we would give to any other sort of young person. I don't think I'm the right person to answer a question about refugees becoming adults at this point. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Wild. Right, thank you. So if you bear with me, I've got a question for health and I've got a question for the police because you've been left alone. So I'll rattle your feathers a bit. Right. So the NHS, so I appreciate you're new in the post. But what people are saying really is, there's referral delays which are horrendous. I mean, I don't know what the time is on your waiting list for these kids or these young people, but I expect it is horrendous. And running through all this is, and I'm sure, you know, I'm not a trained person like you, but what I'd say to you is that, you know, you've got to get these kids help pretty quick. And actually, the NHS is letting them down. And if you let them down, in the first instance, the problems just escalate and get worse and worse and worse. And that reflects in police's workload will go up, you know, the other workload will go up. And when you were talking, and I don't wish to be too critical, but you said something will be happening. Those were the words you used. And then you said, this job you've got is not starting till March. And I'm thinking, what's happening to all these kids in the meantime? So if I say to you now, the question is, how long are those children waiting on the waiting list? Can you tell me?
So I don't know the exact.
No, I didn't think you would.
But you know, that isn't something that I am personally responsible. So I don't know that exact length. But there is an existing group. I'm taking over the chair in March.
Okay.
I'm not the chair at the moment.
Okay.
The group's met twice, and is really looking at how, as it's a multi-agency group, about how do we address these recommendations and these concerns. As Sonia said, it's not easy. It's complex. It isn't just all about health. We're working in partnership as a partnership, so there are interventions going in other areas. I don't deny that the waiting lists are too long, and we want to address those. And it's absolutely is a priority to get our heads together to work out how do that and how do services look different for children that are at risk of exploitation. So it's a priority. It's being worked through. The Children and the Young People and Families Board is now had a reshape and revised terms of reference to look at what's its role in bringing the partnership together and how does it track this going forward, so that we've got a really clear line of sight up to the integrated care board and partnership and as an integrated care system, which is new working for us all. How are we addressing this as a system to make sure that we use our money wisely and target it where it's really needed?
Yeah, and so I come back to you with a question really, and hopefully you'll be able to answer it me, because I'm chair of performance management as well, because I'd like to be able to understand some of this performance data. You know, how long these waits are, because kids are, hopefully, kids are going to be in serious trouble, having to wait for such a long time. And I think it's reflected throughout, with CAMS and everything for all the kids. I appreciate you're trying to do your best, but it is frustrating for us because all we see is really the cards being shuffled and the problems getting bigger. And these are our children. We're all sat here as corporate parents, and so there is a frustration because there are kids. So what we're saying is what's happening, what you're doing for our kids. So I would like that information. And if you could get back to me with that. And now, if I may, I'll ask the police a couple of questions. So, When within your unit, do all your police now wear cameras? Do they, or when they're doing all the looking for the kids, and if you see kids that are out of school, have you always got cameras on or not?
Not always. Body worn video is issued to all frontline officers, so that would be the patrol 24/7, some of our proactive CID units. But those that will be dealing kind of to the immediate response to incident will have the option of body worn camera. Whether they turn it on or not is another matter. There are certain operational parameters in which they have to do, such as domestic abuse, arresting people. But most officers will turn it on at every incident and then decide afterwards whether or not that's an evidential incident that needs to be kind of downloaded to the server or just deleted off the system.
Yeah, because I think my question really is about data sharing. Because obviously I don't know how much data sharing you're allowed to do with trees, but obviously you're on the front line and you see these children. So if you can readily identify them, that's going to be, a help as well. But I think there is a connection, and you must seeing it, between bullying and exploitation. Is there, or do you find that, or
Bullying and exploitation are kind of two very, to my mind, separate
different?
strands.
But are they related?
I would say not, but I'm not an expert in that area.
Right. Okay. Because I was just, wondering, when schools get issues with a lot of bullying, does that actually lead to something else?
I mean, certainly if someone's being bullied and they feel outside of the in-group within their school, they would become more of a target for someone with exploitation, I would argue.
Yeah. So what used to happen? Well, in our local area bit, when they had a lot of bullying, the police used to go on school bus with their camera on just to have a look. I mean, obviously, this is about trying to get the intel and trying to find out, what's happening where. Do you do random things like that? Because I don't exactly know what you do to try and find out what's going on. Is that sort of the things you do, or?
It's one of the suite of tactics.
Yes.
There's a number of ways, and it's not just the police's responsibility, it's everyone's responsibility, as my colleagues have said.
Yeah.
And we information share much better than we ever have in the past. And for example, if you're saying there's a situation where we capture something on video but we don't know who that person is, then certainly that's something we would consider sharing with partners to say, is this we'd probably go to the school in the first instance and say, who is this kid, child, young person. So yeah, I wouldn't say we kind of go on school buses as such. That's down to whoever's driving the bus should really understand who their clientele is on that bus. But in terms of our Safer Outside Schools patrols that we do with the Safer Neighbourhood teams, in terms of our youth engagement PCSOs, our police community support officers who go into the schools, deliver certain educational products that are devised by the entire Community Safety Partnership and agreed as part of the curriculum, part of the PSHE that schools do. We have our Safer Neighbourhood officers who will have direct links with the schools and will regularly contact the schools. We also have our local police and community charter, which is our commitment to be in contact on a regular basis with our parish councils and also our schools. And we have another my words here, contact contract, where we agree the way that we're going to communicate with each other in terms of any kind of day-to-day issues or any emerging issues, problems that they need us or the Community Safety Partnership to help them address.
So if you've got obviously you have police in the town, all the market towns, and some of those might be CSOs or whatever. So if they're seeing the same kids hanging about the streets, do they then pass the information on to you? Because obviously, is that how it works? Is it, or?
It's much wider and more holistic than that.
But that's it's the same sort of idea, is it? So that you can get intelligence from a very wide range of different areas. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. The intelligence doesn't just come from us feeding it in. It comes from the information and the contacts we have on a daily basis, just talking to people contacting us through Contact Us or 101 or on the Single Online Home, our online platform. Our partners contact us and vice versa. We share all that information.
And the buses, so they have cameras on buses and they have cameras at the train station. So all those people feed into the whole, so you get information for a very wide area.
Yeah. Cameras, the street wardens and street rangers in the town. Similarly, similar schemes being set up in Oswald Street. Right from the people who are kind of out collecting the bins in the morning, to the people who are walking their dogs in the evenings. All that information is there, and we exploit it as much as possible. Yeah,
because I think because I know data sharing was a problem because of data protection, but I think data sharing to try and protect and understand what's going on is really important. So I'm really pleased that that's going on. And I thought somebody better ask you a question because you've given up your time to come. So thank you very much.
Jeanette, do you want to
just come back initially and then ask Jeanette to expand on the question? So I think it's important to note that we have quite robust data sharing agreements and intelligence sharing agreements in place with the police, and all of that and how it's done is governed, and we have the right governance in to support that. And actually, it's much easier than you think it is. We do just share it. I think that the link between bullying and exploitation is an important one, and I'll let Jeanette come back on that because there's a particular area where that's kind of evolving really. The other aspect is that mapping meetings are the most important thing that we do, and that is where quite large groups of professionals that have got concerns about young people, we explore who knows who's socialising with who's being seen with who, where, when, and it's really quite detailed intelligence information. So it's all right, all of that coming into the police, but then what do you do with it? So the mapping meetings are the way in which sometimes 20, 30, 40, we've had 13, 14, 15 children being considered. And part of that is everybody that knows that child and what they're doing and where they are, and they've got information from their parents, from the school, from them, the children themselves, where they're hanging out, known adults, names that kind of come up, pop up, etc., is then mapped to see, and you can quite often work out what the hierarchy is, who's doing what, where is the child being exploited, or are they starting to coerce, you know, who are they working for, etc. And those have been really quite critical in kind of really being able to then inform plans for disruption that the police and licensing and trading and other agencies do, because you can then go in and disrupt activity. So, for example, we did have in one of our larger towns a situation where there were some named restaurants, some named vape shops, and trading and licensing standards went in and disrupted that activity, whilst the youth team were also then having a presence around those properties, etc. And that all came out of the intelligence that came from a mapping meeting. Do you just want to talk about the game side of things?
Yes, just in response to your question around the bullying and the connection with exploitation. So we are seeing some rivalry gangs, if you like, and that can often play out as violence and aggression. So we tend to kind of see that more as gang-related violence rather than understanding it as bullying. But I guess the outcome is pretty much the same. We are seeing an increase in children being excluded from school because of assaults on peers and taking offensive weapons in school, as well as drug-related incidents. So I know that there's an established process between schools and the police now where we're trying to share information a bit more widely. And then just to mention as well, very quickly, in April, we're looking at introducing a new triage within Compass, not specifically around exploitation, but I am hoping that we perhaps identify young people at a much earlier stage by having this information sharing process. So it will involve police, it will be police-led information. So it's all the incidents that police get called out to that currently don't really sit within an existing pathway. So we'll have a multi-agency triage to look at that information. We'll have education, health, youth offending have committed to it, as well as targeted early help, children's social care. And it could be what seems to be really something quite insignificant, you know, a family called out because little Billy's being hard to manage, but actually by coming together as a multi-agency group of professionals, we can share and try and get a better, wider understanding of what's going on for that young person or the family, and put in place, more importantly, early help and support at a much earlier stage. So if police had just sent us that information into Compass, we'd looked at that, looked at our system, not known to us, and probably taken no further action. But actually, the conversation that you can have with everybody around the table will bring that child to life a bit more, if you like, and we can identify actually, yeah, the poor attendance at school, and someone asked us for early help a few months back. You know, you pull together the pieces of the jigsaw. So we're hoping that that will be really effective, and it's based on a model called Pit Stop that's operating in another local authority, which I've really forgotten the name of. I apologise, but that actually was inspected recently and got outstanding. So we're really hoping that we can make a difference here in Shropshire too, as well. So we'll keep you posted on that.
We got to have a report back on it. Councillor Hurst-Knight, do you have a question?
Excuse me, I'm not there because I've ended up with the cold, so I'm keeping my germs away. I'm just going to talk, maybe Jeanette could explain a little bit about the intel and the sharing and the people that sat around CE panel. I think, you know, it's really important that you, Scrutiny, understand the detail and the level of conversation of who's best placed to support that person, what's the plan. I mean, it is encouraging. Councillor Evans, you say we have a good service. I'll argue with you. We have an outstanding service. The work I've seen and the growth of the team, I'm always outstanding at the level of support that our young people get and striving. Councillor Wild, yes, we need to be on that front foot constantly. What can we do? What do we know? And that's where the intel comes in, and the communication is key, which we know is excellent in Shropshire. And I think you've just had an example there with the pit stop. It's constant evolution. Nobody is sitting back thinking we've got this, we're managing it. You know, we heard, didn't we, Tanya, recently at the Health and Wellbeing Board, the amount of county lines that have stopped, but it's encouraging the police when we've still got X amount too many, even though so many have been swiped out, and you're nodding. You know, it's encouraging, it's collective working, and we need to keep going at this because, you know, we are seeing results. But as always, Jeanette, thank you to your team, and Sonia, you know, excellent work, and you just need to keep going. But maybe just a little conversation about CE panel and the detail, I think, would be really helpful here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so child exploitation panel is held once a month. So it's kind of above triage, but below the safeguarding partnership priority group. So it is a strategic group, but it's also operational. So we share all the data. So the monthly report that Claire, my operational lead, produces. So we talk about all the new referrals that we've received. We talk about all the intelligence that we've received over the last month. We get an update from all the key agencies who are delivering support and intervention to young people. We get an update from West Mercia Police around their activity, so how many community abduction warning notices they've issued, any arrests, any operations that are going on across the county. We identify areas of concern that as a partnership we need to address, so that might be a hotspot, you know, if we're hearing about a certain location, what we can do to disrupt any activity, or named perpetrators. We get an overview of all of our high risk young people that are on our tracker at high risk, because what we want to ensure is that the work and the plan around reducing that risk is appropriate, and if it's not effective, what more can we do, what needs to change. So we talk about a range of things really at a strategic level, but like I say, that does come out with actions, and I think Kirsty on occasion will come out with some actions as well. So it really is a partnership of how we can address exploitation in Shropshire, and then that all then feeds into the safeguarding partnership quarterly meeting.
Thank you, Jeanette. Councillor Love.
Thank you, Chair. It's great. Everything is really good. But the thing that's really coming out to me, which we're perhaps failing on or behind it, is very much the therapeutic. And as Sonia said earlier, you do just get that opening, that very small opening, which is there for the young people. And I just don't know what we can do as a committee, but to sort of put a bit of pressure on that's addressed as soon as possible, and not just waiting until you've got your meeting in March, or you take, you know, it's something that needs to be addressed as soon as possible, and to get that highlighted, because it's something that's coming out quite strongly, that is where we're failing. Everything else seems to be coming together and doing really well, but how we're supporting these young people with the therapeutic book, and as we all understand, it is a very you should be getting that help on the day that they need it, because you might lose it and then it's lost and they might not come back. I don't know what we can do for the committee to sort of put a bit more pressure on to make sure that happens.
So you, Chair. I was just going to say, I was going to add another recommendation to the report, Hilary, and to ask for the waiting times for the mental health for exploited children to come back as soon as possible, because, you know, we need to know that information.
It's not good enough.
Yeah, So we can add that as a recommendation if you're happy. Is everyone happy for me to move the recommendations and add that one? Is that all right? Yeah. Is that okay?
Not all questions? Yeah. So do you want to?
Yeah, well, I don't, if that's okay with you, Peggy. Yeah, I'll move the recommendations and I'll add that extra recommendation. So if everyone's happy with that.
I'll second.
Yeah, David second, Dina. Yeah, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. And can I thank everybody that's come along today to answer our questions. I know you're all working as hard as you can to get these problems. They'll never go away, will they? We just have to get in there as quick as we can. But thank you all. Really do appreciate it. If you want to leave now, yeah.
The others.
Sorry.
First one to get the tickets.
Oh, right, okay.
Put your list there. That's not the.
Sorry?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, of course you can. I was just going to say to you, I had a call off a resident in Whitchurch about frogs. No, it was to compliment. I had a call from a resident. Yeah. Oh gosh, we got some new faces down the bottom. I found this. We're now going to move to item number 7 on the agenda, which is the preparing for adult report. And we have Carol and Sarah and Kelly. We'll pass over to you then now, if you like. Yes, please.
You have to put that on, otherwise the people who are listening in can't hear.
Okay, so that's on now, is it?
Yeah, so everyone can hear you.
I'm Carol Crotson and I'm a service manager working in adult social care. I have lead responsibility for preparing for adulthood.
Morning, I'm Kelly Cubeless. I'm preparing for adulthood lead for adult social care.
Good morning, I'm Sarah Thomas. I'm a parent carer and I work for the Shropshire Parents and Carers Council. So I work closely with the PFA team and with other services representing the voice of children with SEND in Shropshire.
Thank you. Who's taking the lead?
We came
in 2021 to talk to you about preparing for adulthood, and a request to return to update on where we're up to. So there's a big update in our report about where we're heading and our general direction. Obviously, the last few years have taken an impact on where we're going and the ability of us to deliver the services that we had planned, but we've still managed to make quite a considerable amount of progress with young people. We work very closely with our Parent Carer Council to have feedback from young people and from families that are receiving services from us to make sure we're hopefully heading in the right direction and delivering and developing services that are what young people and their families are requesting in their communities, and to give them the best possible opportunities. So really for today, I wanted to talk to you about where we're going and for us to get some clarification from you about whether you agree that our direction is correct and that we're developing our services for young people in the right way. So one of our big objectives is around young people having a really good quality of life and making sure that after their experience of being in school and having an education, health and care plan, which gives them a really robust and bespoke timetable to their week and activities within their week, that once they leave education, that doesn't fall off. We know we have young people in our communities that are isolated, that are at home, that don't have the right support, don't have social interaction, and don't have really meaningful activity in their day. So we're working with our providers, with our social workers, with our Parent Carer Council to ensure that everybody understands the real value and meaning of young people having that activity that isn't just about filling time, that it's really about it being meaningful, that it's leading somewhere, that when you're doing something, you know why you're doing it and it's taking you to the next place in your life. And that when young people move on, that we don't park people places, that they don't just go somewhere and have an experience and that's it. None of us do that in our life. We don't go somewhere, have a job and stay there for the rest of our lives. And that's the experience of our young people with SEND sometimes. So we really want to make sure that we're giving young people long-term goals and plans and they understand what they are, and everybody supporting them and understands what they are and moves them on and supports them in that direction. So that is a real robust link with the HCPs, with education, health and care plans. Social care needs to take responsibility for us having a really good contribution, but also understanding their EHCP. And then when young people do transition on, that we are able to support the content of that moving on into their adult life, and that the objectives within there are continually reviewed and maintained and updated to make sure that families and young people, having had an experience of that planning, that we don't lose that and that continues on. We want to improve the way we share information with young people and families. Shropshire is a big place. And when I first came to this job, everyone told me there was nothing in Shropshire. And it's not true. There is so much in Shropshire, but people don't know what it is and they're not joined up. So we want to make sure that our online presence is really good and people can find information and find each other as much as anything else. But also not just rely online. PAC are amazing at having word of mouth, and that good news travels fast, and if people have an experience of using a service and they have a good time, that travels, and if they have an experience of using a service and it isn't, that it travels back to us and that we do something about that. So we really want to give people an infrastructure whereby they know what's in their community and they know how they can use it. And employment, we want every young person's objective and every young person's goal to be paid employment. We know not every young person is going to get to that, but if we don't have that as the objective, what do we make the objective? We need to aim high for everybody. So we're thinking about how we can embed enable services into everyday service so they can have a relationship with young people and start to have a reciprocal relationship, so they can start to see when young people have got skills and match them to employment. But they can also be saying to services that are supporting young people, this is where there are jobs. Support young people to train and have skills in these. And then there's employment at the end of it. So, and it's not just ASIBs, that's everywhere. That's our colleges, everywhere that young people are using. We want to keep embedding. And it's not just when you leave school, we think about jobs. Some young people with special educational needs mature more slowly. They can learn more slowly. Sometimes when they're 30, they're ready for employment, but we're missing those opportunities still. If they've gone to day service, again, they can end up parking there and staying there. What we really want to see is young people being identified at the moment that's right for them to take that next step and keep moving on. Sarah, would you like to add?
I think, as Kelly says, that the aim and the objective, the vision of the PFA team is really appropriate and reflects what families have told us. Our particular concern is around ensuring that there is a joined up approach, and this, what the PFA team are looking to achieve, can't just be done by the Preparation for Adulthood team. So it's really important about those links with children's social care, and I know that has been looked at and there has been steps taken to improve that, but it's also really important to look at health. We know there are massive health inequalities for these young people. We're mainly talking about young people with learning disabilities and or autism, huge health inequalities that are linked to the fact that they often become very inactive, which damages both their physical and their mental health. And there's a real cost to the system going forward, you know, not just a cost to the individual, but a cost to the system as well. So we work at the ground level. We're doing a lot of work around building communities, bringing people together, because families repeatedly told us that they felt isolated from each other. They didn't know, as Kelly said, what was available. And so being able to bring families together to build their confidence, to build young people's friendship groups and confidence going forward, that will really enable them to participate in what is out there and make the most of the opportunities to come forward. So we feel that there's been some really good progress made. The PFA team has definitely been a real positive step forward for Shropshire, and we're really pleased that the Shropshire was forward thinking enough to take on that role. What we'd like to see now is a greater recognition across the system of the roles everybody has to play, and that, yeah, we're having a conversation today that could include things like looking at transport and the ability to get to places as well, as what's on offer, and the training of staff and the understanding of those and support these young people going forward.
So we work a model of relationship-based social work with young people. We really look at young people's strengths, and we want to work in an invest-to-save way, that when we really invest in young people at this time in their life, it can give us massive, for the system and for the young person, massive benefits in their later life. When we don't get it right at this really pivotal stage for young people, we see the consequences for them in their individual lives, but we also see the cost implications for the system as young people move further on. Their mental health suffers, their physical health suffers, their need for care and support increases and increases and increases. So what we're really thinking about all the time, and all of these things tap into it and cover it, that how can we support this young person to look forward to their life, to really enjoy their life, and to need the minimum amount of support possible. So really by investing heavily now, and the support is really expensive. There's no two ways around that. It does cost a lot of money, but if we do it now for a short period of time and give young people skills, give them the support they need, set them up for life where they know where they're going and the support is right, we don't then have young people coming back in crisis and that systems breaking down, their support breaking down, families not being able to support them. So we really do want as much support as possible and to work in partnership across the whole system that young people touch, to make sure that we're all thinking in the same way, and we're all thinking, let's do it right the first time, and then we don't have problems. Like Sarah said, we're linking up with our colleagues in children's social care. From the 1st of April, we're going to be a physical team as Preparing for Adulthood, which we haven't been before. We've been a virtual team previously, and we're going to share some physical space with children's social care, so they know who we are, we know who they are. You overhear those conversations, that relationship really becomes much stronger, and we're wanting that support from our colleagues in children's, where they see where their young people go on to, and that really affects their decision making when the children are children, and thinking implications of the decision I'm making when this child is 12 has a long-reaching effect, and it's a really big effect. And when they continue to hear us talking about those young people and see that, that's something that we're really keen to do. And we're also thinking about working with our colleagues across the whole of adult social care, because young people leave us once they're settled and they've transitioned. How do we best support young people as they become less young people, you know, and they become adults? So we're all working together in adult social care to develop that system as well.
I found this really, really good, this report. You know, the concept of getting that child earlier to thinking what their life could be just makes such a difference. Sorry, Councillor Wilde, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. It was a brilliant update. But I just wanted to ask, because I'm very aware of health and the impact that has all the way through, you know, children, adults, everything. and I know, I think I know that I think they are starting to make a little bit. There are some green shoots there because of what the lady said before. But I want to know specifically how health has been supporting preparing for adulthood, how you think it's going to evolve, and how you think we can help you raise the profile so that you get the support from health that you need in a timely fashion. Because I think that's part of the problem. The system is so gummed up. So that's my question, really. And you can all have a go if you like it answering that one. Thank you.
So I absolutely agree with you that it's an area that where we need a greater focus and for health to recognise their role and the important role that they can play. There's obviously initiatives such as LEADER, which is the mortality review, looking at early deaths and causes of early deaths for people with learning disability and to a certain extent autism as well. And there is a recognition around the health inequalities agenda in health, but actually that doesn't really translate into supporting people to do ordinary activity. So they tend to focus on specialist health needs, whereas actually what we're talking about is ordinary health needs, but you need specialist support to be able to do it. So to go to the gym or to understand how to maintain your health. So we're still struggling a little bit with that conversation. There is the Learning Disability and Autism programme within the ICS, which is a really useful opportunity to have these discussions at. And there have been opportunities for funding for a new role, which we're calling our PFA Navigator role, which sits within PAC as the voluntary sector organisation in Shropshire and the equivalent organisation in Telford. And that means we've got two parent carers, experienced parent carers, who are there to talk to families about thinking about preparation for adulthood, what should happen in the system, what opportunities there are, the sorts of questions they should be asking. So that is being funded through health, but I think we do have some way to go. Annual health checks, we're still very much under the expected level in terms, and that's particularly for children and young people. There are issues around no learning disability diagnosis pathway in Shropshire. So you can't be diagnosed as having a learning disability until the age of 5. Prior to that, you're diagnosed as global development delay. There is no system for people to go back into the system to be diagnosed as a learning disability. Therefore, they are not on a list to receive an annual health check, even though they might be attending Sevendale School. Have Down syndrome, for example, if it doesn't say they have a learning disability. So the creation of the CYP and SEND integrated system board, I think, is a really positive step forward. So Tanya and Claire Parker, Gareth Robinson are chairing that, taking that forward, an opportunity to discuss these conversations. But as you say, Claire, they are really early stages, and that's a little bit of a worry.
Yeah, and can I just say, the thing that upsets me, I guess, does upset me, is that, an annual health check, how long is that? Half an hour? And the impact of not having that on this, because it is a really difficult time, and we all hopefully remember anyway, about how difficult that transition period was. And I feel very upset and passionate about trying to, the basic things we should absolutely be getting right. So thank you very much for that.
Just to add to Sarah's comment there, we've got a CYP complex summit coming up, haven't we, Sarah, on the 6th of March, which Sarah and I have kind of co-produced a scoping document, because following a meeting that Sarah and I, we were that concerned about the number of families out there that weren't receiving support, particularly from our health services. So we've agreed to have a half-day summit to kind of look at what the issues are, and I've asked Sarah to bring along a carer, a parent, to kind of describe to us what that feels like, what that experience is for her as a family around the lack of provision, because We've got to do something very differently in this system to support our children and families now. So the summit is on the 6th of March, so it might be helpful in thinking about follow up, how you might want to receive a report on that.
Okay, thank you.
Love.
Thank you for your report. It's very interesting. I'd just like to ask you about any young person who is perhaps 16, 17 and has severe learning difficulties. And if they're going to need a move, and in the long term, you would be thinking that as an adult, they might be having their own accommodation with live-in help, which I know we have in this community. Would a young person of 16 or 17 be able to go into their own home, or would they have to? What age can they have their own accommodation? What is the process, rather than them having multiple moves? You know, because often I know that 16, 17 placements do break down. So I was just wondering what the, you know, so you can sort of have the continuity of care for these young people with very specific learning difficulties.
Yep. So in general, the young person would be supported within children's services, and that is that sort of home of your own model necessarily. But what we have been working towards and have been managed to do for a few young people is move them into their own home with a tenancy where the local authority children's services guarantee that tenancy for them, and they do have supported living from that point, which supported living doesn't have an end point. It has lots of challenges within it because the system isn't set up to do that. But I think it also has challenges for the young person, that supported living is a really big step. There's responsibilities within it. You have your own tenancy. That's quite a big thing for a young person to do, and emotionally to deal with that big step into their own home, that sometimes something interim is better. Some young people do really well moving on from home to maybe residential college and that step, and then moving on to their own home. So for each young person, it's different. But for a small group of young people, we have moved them to supported living before their 18th birthday and have been able to support them to do that. But that is quite a small group. There's often something that is better for them as an interim.
So maybe someone who's got severe autism, who's and is going to have long-term support for life. That would be something that you would be able to consider doing.
Absolutely. So we supported a young man early last year at 17 and a half to move. So he was in a registered children's home. We knew he was going to move. It was the right move, and we were able to work with children's social care to secure a provider to get his own tenancy. And he did move into adult provision at 17 and a half, and it's been very successful for him. And he's still there, and he's a young person who has his own needs.
And a support network around him.
Absolutely, absolutely. So he was a looked after child, and he's now attending some day services, starting to look at employment, and that really robust team support. So something that I would really like us to look at is some joint commissioning with children's services as maybe 16 to 20 provision for young people who have really grown out of children's options but aren't ready for the adult world. And we think about what that offers and how it can really set young people up for the adult world.
Yeah, because I do understand there's a shortage of places for these few children that have got very specific difficulties.
Right for the young person as well, because we do put the young person in the centre of the conversation and the assessment. So some young people will benefit from going away to a college or other opportunities, where the example Kelly's given us was a young person that was coming out of a children's home. Had we not looked at, could we support him before he was 18, he'd have probably been sent many miles away from Shropshire, and that just wasn't appropriate. So everybody came together, which actually also had to include Ofsted because he was under 18, in order to look at how best to support him.
Yeah, that's encouraging. Thank you.
Smith.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As a substance committee, obviously, I hope that some comments I might make might not be appropriate, or you might have covered them earlier, but I just wanted to raise some things which come to my mind. That was on page 8 of the report. It says that we're working to ensure that each young person supported by PFA team at the point of leading education has adult education with a robust and meaningful plan. It assumes that in some ways that some don't. So I assume you've got a target or something that to have all leave education, leave with a meaningful plan. I assume. Excuse me if I'm a sub-member, so I don't know whether that's, but I'm assuming
No,
that's the
absolutely
case.
not. So only about a third of young people with an EHCP will have a Care Act eligible need, so will come to us in the Preparing for Adulthood team. So that third of young people we can have some impact with, but that's not to say that we're not working with PAC and the wider system, because all young people should have that, but they don't all need adult social care. So 66% of those young people don't need that, but we need to be part of the conversation to make sure that every young person does. But for those 33% of young people that do come to us, we do need to make sure that they don't, as I was talking about before, they don't park, that they don't move on, that we think about a really good plan for them, and then our eyes off the ball because there's more young people coming, and we don't continue to make sure those young people are being supported to develop and that they're supported to make the next step when they're ready. Some young people aren't ready for employment until they're 25, maybe 30, but there is a point when they are ready to move on from where they are now, and that's where we're thinking about that robust plan to make sure that there's continuation of learning and development for everybody.
Okay,
I
thank
think it's would need to be the majority of the all of the young people who are currently supported in our Children with Disabilities team are likely to come into our provision in adults, and that's one of the very big key groups that we work with. And then we look at children that are in care and looked after, and we've got parental responsibilities for, because some of those will also come through. Because we're partners in the SEND agenda, then we obviously look at any young person with an EHCP plan who will need some support for preparing for adulthood, but they wouldn't necessarily, 2/3 of that group will not come into adult social care.
Thank you. Can I just move on to
Sorry,
a couple of other points?
Just add to that, just to say, I think there is a challenge at the moment around the experience of families when EHCPs end, and that's a conversation that we're encouraging both the PFA team and the SEND team to have together, and it's one of those areas where it's not just about working with the disabled children's team, it's also about working with the SEND team and saying what comes next, and that might be as simple as actually celebrating the end of an EHCP plan, because everybody, the young people has met their objectives and they know what's going to happen, but it also means about not dropping off into a cliff edge, which some families still do at the moment.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much for that. There's I'm interested in that you were actually kind of bidding for funds to have a community hub, I think it is, and also this thing about the portal, which seems, from what you're saying, it's quite vital, crucial development, really. I just wondered whether there's got any more information about that, or whether you've got plans to report back to the committee in the future about developments of that. Because I know in other parts of the authority, sometimes there hasn't been enough support given to bids for funding, external funding. I just wondered how that was going.
Okay, so it was a conversation that we'd started happening in wider adult social care. There's lots of use of hubs, and it's not something we've done for children previously. So I phoned Sarah and had a conversation, and she was already having that same conversation within her network. So fortunately, we were going in the same direction. And what we would like to develop, lots of young people do not have a social network in the area of Shropshire that they live. Shropshire's like a bowl for young people, and they all rolled into the centre to come to Sevendale or come to their provision, and then they go home and they don't have friends and they don't use things in their local area. So we're hoping, but by developing hopefully third sector led hubs within areas that we contribute to as a local authority, that young people will start to embed within their own communities and start to find out what's available, and their communities to open up and say, actually, I'm doing some of these things, you don't know I'm here, let's link up. So we're hoping that will be part of that conversation, and we're wanting to do that together. So we are working a bit into the NDTI, and the resource from that is support from the NDTI. It's not a grant, it's they come in and physically support us with developing those and looking at how we can use a community-led model to embed people within their communities. And then the portal that we're looking at, we're working with our colleagues in culture, leisure and tourism, and what we'd really like to do is have an online portal whereby anybody initially within the local authority, but I'd like to widen it out eventually, could say, I've got this work experience placement, or I've got this voluntary placement, or I've got whatever it is that they've got that needs doing, and anybody with a special educational need or disability, or their carers or their support workers or their family can go on and say, I really like that opportunity, or I'm a young person and I've got this skill, I would like to advertise that I've got this skill and I'm looking for this type Is there anybody out there that could offer that to me? And that could be one-to-one. And I think there's a really great opportunity for groups of young people who maybe wouldn't cope one-to-one or wouldn't cope in a voluntary placement, but can really offer something. Sevendale pre-COVID had a great model where they were taking out groups of young people to the police station and they managed their grounds outside, and that was really meaningful activity for them. And I think we're a huge organisation, aren't we, as a local authority? And if we could have some support and resource to develop that portal, we could really start giving young people meaningful experiences, and they would be contributing. They've got so much to offer that we're currently missing out on. So it's being led by our colleagues in Culture, Leisure and Tourism are putting in bids for some money, and we hope that's something that we can then start on maybe quite a small scale. Maybe it'll be our Culture, Leisure and Tourism venues that start to offer that, and all our colleagues in supported living start to look at it, and then we widen it up and we make it broader and broader. So eventually everybody can use that, everyone can go on and put on opportunities, and everyone can offer themselves as an opportunity within that.
I think we took lead. We have a SEND strategy, which I'm sure you're all aware of, which was co-produced with young people and families themselves. Excuse me. But in this SEND strategy, the sort of key areas that we look at and we take that lead are accommodation, employment, but also occupation outside leisure facilities, and draw your attention to the work that we've been doing with the Culture, Leisure and Tourism partners, because they're in the council, but they don't sit in adult social care. And yet there's been some phenomenal work, training, support. They've come to the table, they've wanted to engage, they've wanted to look at how their services can be accessible. And it's actually been fantastic, hasn't it? It's been really revolutionary, the work that we've been doing together.
Yeah, so to sing their praises, really, it's been pushing on an open door for them. As soon as we came to the table with them and said we would like to do this, they said, right, we're ready. This is what we're already doing. They were doing so many things that I didn't even know about. So museums, libraries, theatres, staff have all been trained now in learning disability and autism, country parks. So all of their staff, but it's also opened up for people in other culture, leisure and tourism venues who've wanted to join in. So they've had some initial training from joint training around awareness, and then they've also had some more bespoke training from one of our third sector colleagues, Ignition, who have done, how do I apply this in my particular venue? So if I work in a library, how do I make it friendly? How do I make regional adjustments? What sort of services can I offer? What bespoke things can I do to make my venue really accessible to people with SEND, and make them want to come and make them want to use it? And they've been very, very enthusiastic about it. We've had a really great response from them.
Yeah, I think it just demonstrates you probably wasn't expecting us to walk in talking about preparing for adulthood and actually start sharing some of the work we've been doing with other partners in the corporation. But it's been really good. It's been fantastic.
It sounds like a brilliant development. Certainly, obviously, I hope in the future be able to report back to the committee about the the progress you're making in that area. But the last thing is I just wanted to raise was the recommendations in the report. I wonder, you've got page 8, there's recommendations which don't seem to amount to much, but then above that you've got focus of future development, which seems like that should be the recommendations. I don't know. I mean, I don't know quite how the committee works, but it seems to me that it would be useful to have some recommendations going forward from this report. It seems there's some very interesting developments, and for Cabinet to be aware of what the progress that's been made.
Can I just say that, the reason why we've got the report today is because Councillor Ruth Houghton, who obviously shares quite an interest in this and was part of the team, asked for the update. And this is basically an update. And so I think probably, maybe we have another update in another 18 months or something like that. But it wasn't really clear what, other than an update, it was an update, I think. So I just thought...
Yeah, we responded to the request when we last came to come in 18 months to present an update, rather than us saying, can we come because we have something that we need from you to recommend.
So really it was a request from Ruth. That's why they're here. So yes, I'll wait my turn and then make a suggestion.
Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chairman. I read the report. Question right at the start, young people. If there are lack young people go to 25 rather than the 16, 17, 18. So it goes right the way through that. But reading the the report, I see at 4, risk assessment and opportunities. By identifying those in most need, we can target resources. And then in section 5, when it says financial implications, it's just blank. So I'm interested in financial resources, target resources, anything like this. And I note on page 10 the number of children that are there and the resources that are available. Is there sufficient? Do you need more? And as Councillor Vasmer said about, are you focused on the correct areas for development? Do you have sufficient resources to actually focus on it or not? Because if we give a report, panel gives a report to cabinet, and I said at an earlier time about the Shropshire Council budget is under pressure, but this is an important area for the future, and we do not need these young people to enter adulthood without the resources and the facilities that we need and they need to take forward. So I was interested in that resources and the finances there, which is but I also noticed the SEND report, which was published on Monday, and there's 2 areas there where they've said that the areas have not made sufficient progress. One on waiting times for ASD and ADHD, and one for significant waiting time for those needing assessment. Now, if they're 16, 17, 18, and they're waiting assessment, that's an important time in their life when they're doing that transfer. So again, I come back to the budgetary and the resources that are available to actually give them and enable them to look forward to the future with hope, and us to not have to pick up the pieces, I suppose, is the crude way of putting it later on. So that is an important transition. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Hurst-Knight, did you want to reply there?
Excuse me, sorry. Yeah, maybe a little bit difficult, Councillor Evans, because we haven't got a representative from the NHS here to talk about the 2 areas. But absolutely, as a partnership, and Sarah is a co-chair on the partnership, we are, working with our NHS colleagues. We know there's some short-term interim measures that they're taking, but we really are pushing on these. We need to see development and speed and action. But yeah, it's going to be very hard for our colleagues here to answer that when the 2 areas on the SEND inspection are really, we should have had a health representative answer that, but we can get those responses for you.
I just comment just in terms of we know that demand, particularly on children's social care and the disabled children's team, is significantly increasing. And those are the young people that will be coming through eventually to the preparation for adulthood team and will need long-term social care help going forward. So we know that is an area of concern about the resources to address these needs at the earliest point. As Kirsty said, that the neurodevelopmental pathway is a massive area of concern, and we are seeing already the lack of intervention from that pathway, which is recognised by the Ofsted report as not making progress, having an impact on the mental health and quality of life of young people who are then moving to the PFA team. And as you say, it does mean that that the issues are greater and the demand on the system is greater in the long term. So it would be something that would be useful to have a conversation with health colleagues about.
If I could, Claire's coming in later maybe, but maybe something the panel would wish to take on for the future, but I'll leave that to permanent members and maybe Claire to take forward as part of the recommendation.
What you're talking about and planning on bringing into the work programme, Roger.
Yeah. So all right for me.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I think there was a slight bit of confusion because this report really came as an update, which was requested by Ruth. Unfortunately, she's not here. Got 2 subs today. So I think, the SEND stuff, I listened to that on the radio this morning, but that, like Peggy said, is going to be dealt with again. So I think probably the easiest thing to do in the recommendations is obviously to thank the staff for coming, because it's really good to talk to you, and recommend that they give us another update in 18 months' time. But I think the most important bit is following the updated action plan from the Children and Young People completed needs summit to be shared at the next People's Committee. So that's the thing that's happening within the next few weeks, isn't it? So I think if that's shared, that will give us an idea. And I think once we've got that feedback, it will be quite good, because then we could work that into the work programme, if you like.
Yeah.
So that's the only really bit of meat, I think, because everything else will be dealt with separately. Is everyone happy with that?
Yeah. Councillor Turley, you have a question?
Yeah. We talked about the NHS and working across borders with Telford and things like that. Can we take this another step and sort of work cross borders with Telford for placements and the HCPs? Because at the moment I've got a parent in Shifnal, I've got a few parents in Shifnal who have to use the services within Shropshire. And because we're right on the far east side, we're around the back of Telford. One child currently is going to Sevendale. And they're having to travel all the way from Shifnal to Sevendale on a regular basis. But the cost implications on that must be huge. Whereas if we had a better working relationship with Telford, could we utilise some of Telford's placements, some of Telford's services, and work cross-border, like we do similar with the health basis? Yeah.
I get that's a difficult one for us. It would be an education, I guess, a conversation to send, because that's placements. As much as we can do within social care, we do have those relationships with Telford, and we have those conversations. If that's where young people want to live for us or use services in those areas, we do. But in terms of school placements, that would have to be sent to answer that one.
So that really forms part of the net, when we put it on the work programme, Kev, I think that would be an important part when we looked at all the send stuff.
Yeah, it's a key issue.
It is a no-brainer. And also perhaps Wolverhampton across the other way, because that's
going out the other way from Albrighton.
Yeah.
It is something parents, I mean, it's not a vast amount of parents, but parents do bring their concerns with these issues. And it's just trying to sort of join the dots together. Because you've got so much areas across the county where we border in Cheshire, where we border in Wales. There might be other catchments within those areas across the whole framework we can pull together and utilise a greater amount of services and placements. Okay.
We do take into consideration where the young person may determine they wish to live. But alongside that, if we're looking at supported living or we're looking at young people living together, we also have to look at how they match and whether or not they're going to be able to wish to live together or want to live together. So sometimes, although somebody may wish to stay in Shifnal, the decision may be overridden for them with them because the accommodation offer or the young group that they wish to be with, their friends, are actually probably going to be in Shrewsbury. So it's quite a difficult one, and it's quite finely balanced, having to look at what does the young person want, what does the family want, where are the group of friends? Because it's, if you want to live with your friends, you're not always going to have friends that are going to be in Shifnal, because many of the young people we work with, as you've said, have been to school in Sevendale. So it's quite a finely balanced, difficult conversation to have to work out the best for the young person.
It's not an easy one to sort of fathom out, but it's all the different logistics for parents and to get the support.
No more questions? I found this really good. And I love that comment about 1620 as well. An area to look at. Yeah.
Really good. We are currently working to look at the 0 to 25 agenda, because lots of the legislation and the policies cover that area, and that's what we're in very close conversation with Sonia, who was here before us, actually looking at how we can develop that further and what the next steps are. Co-location with Sonia's officers is our next first step. People are coming into the Shirehall so that we'll be sitting next to each other and developing that. And then the world's your oyster, really. Where do we go next? Do we have one whole team, part of team, different makeup, and they're all parts of the conversations and development that at the moment all of us are looking at.
Majesty, it's going to make a better life for these children. Did you want to? I was going to go to the recommendations now. What do you want to do?
I did move some recommendations, but shall I do it again?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So first of all, to thank all the staff for coming, and recommend that we have another update in 18 months' time. And then, following the updated action plan from the Children and Young People Completed Needs Summit to be shared at the next People's Committee, which is what Tanya was discussing.
Yeah.
And we can just have a brief, and then I think we're okay. And then the send stuff, we go to the work programme. Is everyone happy with that?
Somebody like to second?
Yeah. I'll second it. Second.
Can we just say a particular thank you to Sarah, please? Because obviously Sarah's given up her time to join us this morning. And she also was she's given us a lot of time in the preparation of the report and has contributed to that.
Yeah, I've known Sarah for quite a long time. Thank you very much, Sarah. If I see you in town, I'll buy you a coffee. No, I did listen.
Oh, was it you? I was sitting in the car park listening to you. I came in. Yeah. It was good. It was good. Right, so we're sorted.
Yep.
Thank you all so much. It's really, really good. It is. Right. So I think the next meeting. Bye now. We will look at the report from the summit and the send comments, Roger. Okay. I think that'll take the whole meeting, those two issues. So I
talk about the work programme.
I guess for the work programme that I've got in front of me that Daniel shared with me for the next meeting, you have 4 items already identified.
Yeah.
So that's not to say you can't decide. It's absolutely, as like you just said, it's your choice to make a decision on what you do with it. It's more just to flag what they are and then look at how you might want to move those through. And there is one which very strongly links into something I think you were talking about earlier as well. So you've got post-16 destinations. So that's very much looking at the education, employment and training of those young people who are leaving secondary school. There's a closing the gap on which is around pupil attainment. So it's particularly looking around, I think, when we looked after children and some from more deprived backgrounds at Key Stage 4, so 2, 4 and GCSE. So that's normally it might be back to one of those points where, like Claire's made, it might be that it's more of a briefing piece and it's something to look at around, is there something you want to look at and using the data to drive that? Fostering adoption and social worker recruitment, I know there's been big topics over time. Again, and I would look to officers like Tanya to advise on when's the best timing to bring that, and it might not be 29th of March is the best time for that. And the final one, which is the one I think might link across some of what you were saying, but again, might be better to take slightly later point, is the Safeguarding Community Safety Partnership Annual Report. Very much, I think, linked into your first discussion or debate today around exploitation. And there are a lot of points raised in that which were reflected back into, it's discussed as part of the plans and strategies of that partnership board. So it's how best to factor those in, but
is it actually ready? That's
again a good question.
No.
So I think probably, I mean, it's to flag those. They can be moved on. That's not a problem at the committee. I would agree that the SEND report and looking at the actions coming out of the Children and Young People Complex Summit will be substantial themselves. And the other bit I would just flag now is that's the last meeting in this year's work programme on the 29th of March. When we come back into the new municipal year, we will need to look at work programming going forwards. And I think it would be good to tie that very much into what we're saying will be being done to deliver the Shropshire plan and within the service plans as well. And there's some substantial issues which you're picking up on already.
I'm in there for a bit of advice. So we launched the new foster carers campaign in January following our increase in foster carer allowances. So it might be wise for committee to think around June time, because we know it takes about 6 months from initial contact to approval. So it might be helpful for June, July time to consider what's the performance been like since the launch of the campaign. The annual report for 21-22 should be due around June time. So again, you might want to consider the annual report coming into there, which might help create a bit of a gap for the next committee meeting for you to consider the CYP action plan plus the SEND action plan following the revisit. Would that work, do you think, Tom?
Yeah.
Does that create enough capacity for committee to consider those papers?
I think unless we can catch up and have a lot of office level about the other items around the post-16 destinations and closing the gap. What's the best way to do that? Because it might be we have a better mechanism to do that than committee time. It does feel like, particularly based on your conversations today, some of the questions around the table, the updates or the action plan from the complex summit and the SEND report are your hot topics.
Can we make sure that the health people come? Because I think it's really important for us, whatever committee or whatever we're doing, is to keep the pressure on and keep the conversations going. Because, you know, we are part of the ICS and they are starting to do a little bit, but I think the more pressure we can, the more times we can raise it so that we're always challenging and asking for performance, and hopefully we'll make some progress.
Yeah.
First start there, so should have more of like a standardised and doing a lot of stuff, which is difficult. But one of the points that you get from ICS is that oh, sorry, I thought you were I'll leave it till after that. I'll leave it till after.
Yeah. Right, anybody got anything else? No? Well, thank you all for attending. They were two very good reports, I felt. Really good. And good.
Thank you.
Good replies to them.
Tell us when we're
Okay.
not live, that's good.
Thank you very much, everybody.